about the free speech movement as part of the counterculture, that college students are becoming more active in defying authorities and saying that they don't want to be part of what mainstream society has to offer. They want to live in a different capacity. And that's part of the ethos of what the 60s are all about. The counterculture, also known as the hippie movement, they want to challenge authority. And the college activism spreads to other campuses. The University of Michigan here holds the first teach-in. Instead of a sit-in movement, it was a teach-in where they encouraged individuals to come and listen to what people had to say about the ongoing conflict in Vietnam. And we're going to get to that and talk about how in-depth that becomes and how the United States gets involved. But young people actively question whether or not the United States should be militarily involved in Vietnam. And the teach-ins are there to offer different perspectives from individuals regarding what we should be doing in Vietnam and what was actually happening in Vietnam. Americans didn't always believe they got the full picture, and there could be a bit of truth to that. All right. Students also started developing various on-campus groups, including the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society. You see, this is one of their flyers here. The SDS is extremely anti-war when it comes to the Vietnam conflict. The SDS also believed that students should become more engaged in political society, that they should be getting involved in government in ways that they had not been. Young people had always been very passive. They wanted to take a more active role. And you see this flyer right here put up on various college campuses, and they called the National Guard a pigification machine. And you see the transformation here that they claim happens to a young man who goes into the military, that they slowly become a pig, a monster of sorts. And you see underneath it, they talk about in Nuremberg, the American government judged the Nazi soldiers who excused their barbarism with, "I was just following orders," that those people were guilty of war crimes. And they're saying, listen, if you go into the United States military, you're going to become something like a pig, no longer a human being, doing terrible things over in Vietnam. All right, the SDS is also going to get extremely active in bringing home protests and rallies, and these flyers would have been extremely offensive to veterans who had fought in Vietnam. And in Chicago in 1968, there are going to be some massive protests where the soldiers and veterans who had fought in Vietnam are very frustrated with members of the SDS, these college students who hadn't done any fighting at all. And it presents a real problem for society that these young people are becoming active and extremely anti-war. The SDS was also anti-nuclear weapon. They promoted black equality. They also promoted women's equality. It's a real change, or they want a real change or a real upheaval in society. The SDS also had a spin-off group from them, the Weathermen. This is their little symbol right here. Initially, they were called the Weathermen, but they decided that was too sexist. Later on, they called themselves the Weather Underground. But this is pretty much a terrorist group. These are members of the SDS who were not real thrilled with the direction of the SDS, and they thought that sometimes violence needed to be utilized in order to get their point across or to get the government to change policies. And so the Weathermen were responsible for jailbreaks, responsible for setting off a bomb in the Pentagon on the first floor, destroying any type of research laboratory on a college campus where that college campus was doing work for the military. The Weathermen are not afraid to take extreme measures. Right? Now, you also get the hippie movement might have started reaching its peak in the late 60s, 1967 through 69. You get the Summer of Love. People start flocking to San Francisco because you can see that early on in 1967, they start having things they called a be-in. And 1967, they start hosting these events, and you can see from this flyer, you've got all kinds of people that are going to be there. Timothy Leary, the drug advocate. You also had Allen Ginsberg, the 1950s beat writer poem. You see the Steve Miller Band, if you're not familiar with Santana or the Steve Miller Band. Definitely great artists of the time, musicians, and they tell people to bring cymbals, animals, bring your families, drums, chimes, flutes, all that good stuff. The be-in is where people would just get together and exist and enjoy life. And you see a bunch of people here just hanging out, playing music. And course, there was a lot of music to be had, but there's a lot of drugs shared and passed around as well, and people just did things that human beings did. Some people would just bring something simple like bubbles and blow bubbles for everybody. Other people would perform, magic tricks, or people would just drink alcohol or play music of various sorts, whatever they wanted to do. And so San Francisco gets this massive increase of people who come just to experience life. And they come from all over the world. It's not just an American phenomenon. They thought they were creating a new way of living, but unfortunately, though, San Francisco gets really, really crowded with people. And even though there's an abundance of stuff there at the time, that abundance turns to a shortage really fast. And there's a good bit of violence that occurs. People turn from smoking marijuana to doing harder drugs. And so the Summer of Love seemed like a great idea, but it was not something that was going to be some type of model for a new society. The counterculture also will see some major changes in the civil rights movement. Black people had had a great deal of success in the 1950s. The Brown versus Board of Education ruling, the Montgomery bus boycotts. You get the various black groups who are fighting for equality. The 1957 Arkansas, the Little Rock Nine, all very successful. And black people wanted to take some of those successes from the 1950s and really push forward and do more. You see right here, 4 young black college students at North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina. They went to a local Woolworths, and Woolworths was it was a department store, but it was also a department store with a lunch counter attached. And what you see right here, you had like a little diner type atmosphere where you could go in and have lunch. And these black men were upset because black individuals were allowed to go and shop at Woolworths, but you could not eat at the lunch counter. And so to protest this, these 4 men show up and demand to be served, and they refuse to leave until they are served. And initially, they are just allowed to sit there and they're not going to be served. But what transpires is that over time, each day, these black men come back and they bring more individuals with them. And eventually, they keep showing up day after day after day for months, and they bring more people with them, and there are no seats to be had in Woolworths. These black men organize the first nonviolent, what we call sit-in. And eventually, Woolworths has to change their policy about serving black customers at the lunch counter because this sit-in is so successful. These young men didn't really know at the time that this was going to be that successful, but other college students around the country start copying the pattern. They see this as an effective tactic for changing policy. This is where many of the Cal Berkeley students, the free speech advocates, got their idea about a sit-in. And these young black men change the tactics a little bit about what they could do in order to change a policy. Now, while these young black men don't experience any violence in Greensboro, there is some tension there, and white customers are pretty upset and annoyed. Other places, these sit-ins don't go well. People get drinks poured on them. They get hit in the head with bottles. Sometimes they're just hit by individuals. They're dragged out by police. And those sit-ins don't go quite so well. But many of these black individuals make it pretty clear that they're willing to do things in order to obtain the same rights and the equality that black citizens wanted and desired that white citizens already had.